Good morning. I'm John Pérez, Chair of the UC Board of Regents. I want to thank you for joining us in this one-on-one conversation with our new President-designate, Michael V. Drake. Thank you, Dr. Drake, for joining us today. On behalf of the UC community, let me say both welcome and welcome back. Our conversation here is intended to help people get to know you a little better and let them hear directly from you some of the issues that are front and center in your mind and issues facing the university. Before we get started in our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to say thank you to all those who played a part in the presidential search process that resulted in you being chosen as the new president of the university. Per Regents policy, I appointed a special committee to consider candidates and to recommend to the board the appointment of the next president of the University of California. The 10-month search process was the most inclusive and thorough search in the history of the university. As chair and vice chair of the selection committee, Regents Elliott and Lansing did an outstanding job of ensuring this inclusivity. Anchored by rigorous criteria approved by the board, the search committee worked with much diligence to consult with faculty, staff, students, alumni, as well as others in the university community in soliciting an unprecedented amount of public input. The search committee held 5 campus town halls, and more than 100 individuals spoke at those town halls. There were also separate forums held in Northern and Southern California and online portals for members of the UC community to share their thoughts on what we should be looking for in a new president. And as I mentioned at this Tuesday's special meeting of the Board of Regents, we knew that we wanted a president who believed deeply in UC's mission as a public university. We wanted a new president who could both lead UC through these unprecedented times and who could position the university to expand upon its excellence in the years ahead. Dr. Drake, today is one of what I know will be many, many conversations that you'll be having with members of the UC community during this transition and once you officially become president. But I thought, given that travel is limited, that we'd start off as this open forum for members of the community to hear a dialogue between you and me. I said welcome back earlier because of your long ties to UC. As a student and professor at UCSF, as vice president for system-wide health affairs for the entire university, and of course as chancellor at UC Irvine. And I hope you'll share some of your experiences in those positions during our discussion today. But most recently, of course, you were president of Ohio State University. Forgive me, the Ohio State University. I guess it's a little bit like California freeways. The numbers sometimes have the in front of them, depending on where you are when the number comes up. So let's start there. You had decided to retire from the Ohio State University, and instead here you are on the front lines, ready to lead the University of California as we address many challenges that face us now. How did that come to be? How did you decide to be here with us today?
Well, thanks very much, Chairman and President. Thank you very much for all of your support during this process. It really was a process. We had a different plan going forward, really. I had a wonderful time for 9 years at UC Irvine, and then a wonderful time for 6 years at The Ohio State University. And the next phase was, actually I was planning on being quite busy in the next phase, but I was thinking it was going to go off in a different direction. And really through conversations that you and I had with others, the circumstances, the timing, the opportunity were something that presented themselves in such a way that Brenda and I talked about this a lot and believed that it was something that we should in fact entertain very carefully and thoughtfully. And then I say honestly, we'd had an initial conversation with the search committee, the regents that you'd appointed, and I was really taken by their focus, their dedication, the direction that they believe the university should go in, and the chance to be a part of that was intriguing, and here we are.
You mentioned Brenda, and for folks who've worked with you before, they know that we're lucky when you come. Brenda is part of the deal as well, and Brenda's really been a key part of the university for all these years, both in your time at the system-wide health director and at Irvine. So we're happy to have her back home here in California as well.
Well, she's very happy to be back. You know, both of us are alums. She from law school at the University of California, Berkeley, and my medical school at UCSF at the same time. So we've been a part of this system for all of these years in so many ways. And so it's a real homecoming for her as well. And anyone who knows these jobs and jobs like yours and others in this kind of work, these are two-person jobs. They take up, not to say it the wrong way, they take up your whole life. And so they take up your family's life too. And so our coming was really a joint decision, and we're both very excited.
But you really have had an interesting career in all these different places. Clearly, these last several years at The Ohio State University, you were leading a really large public institution through challenging times. How have all those experiences informed your view of taking on the challenges now as president of the University of California system-wide?
You know, it's an interesting question. If I were to look back a day or a week or a month or a year or 10 years or 20 years, all of it has sort of rolled in a progression. And each experience, each opportunity, each thing that I've learned, each thing that's worked well, each thing that could have worked better seemed to have helped prepare me for the next thing that was coming. And it's really been a step-by-step progression to this point. And it just, so really all of it's tied together in that way.
But so I think you have a lens on the university different than just about anybody else. You have 35 plus years at the University of California and then these 6 years at the Ohio State University. How does it look coming back to California, right? So what did the experience of being outside of California add to your view of what our experience must be going forward here in California?
Well, great question. Appreciate it. So I grew up in the system. I began medical school I was 21, and so it was my first real focus as I kind of grew into my adult life, and right away started in the practice of medicine. Started on the faculty at UCSF, made it through those ranks, and had a wonderful time there. Really, all I'd ever wanted to do was to be a medical doctor. In fact, when I started at UCSF, of course, I didn't know much at all about academic medicine. I knew doctors like I'd met or I'd seen on TV, and I was fascinated by the science and the opportunity to work with people, but I didn't know much about what it would be to be on a medical school faculty, to be a part of an academic medical center. And I really loved it at UCSF. I had a great time, had so many lifelong friends from those days, people I hear from on a regular basis these days and have through all the years. And that rolled forward and was going swimmingly. And then I had one position and another as those things work out. And I began to work with the Regents around the middle of the 90s. Some of the policy things that I was doing as a part of the dean's office brought me to the Regents. One of those we can maybe talk about it again as it's coming full circle. And that led me to meet Dick Atkinson, who has been Dick was my wife and I were at Stanford as undergrads. Dick was her department chair, so he's signed her diploma.
We weren't going to try to draw too much attention to your red years at Stanford. We were going to focus on the 35 plus years in UC, but you've outed yourself, so.
Yeah, but the real nice thing there was that it was just great when we looked back at it. Actually, had not remembered that when I was brought to the office of the president to work with Dick, we looked back at Brenda's diploma, and there was his signature as her department chair from 30 years before. It was really nice to have that connection. And then actually working there with Dick and then with Bob Dines, who followed, I moved from being focused entirely on the health sciences to looking at higher education more broadly, and then had a wonderful chance to go to UC Irvine. And one of the terrific pleasures of being at Irvine, I arrived when Irvine was just celebrating its 40th anniversary. And so some of the founding faculty members, founding administrative leaders were still there. And so I was able to talk with people who'd been at the campus from its very beginnings with the vision, and to see where it had come over 40 years and imagine with them where it might go over its next decade. And that was tremendous and worked really, really well. And then the chance came without thinking about it. We weren't looking for something different, but the chance came to go to the Ohio State University. And I thought, goodness, I've been in California and in the system now for all of these years. Things have worked so well. We've met so many wonderful people. What would it be like to go and do this someplace else? What would that experience be like? And so and again, with consultation with Brenda, it really her support with that was critical. We moved for the first time to Ohio. My mother had grown up in Ohio, so there was a bit of a homecoming there, but I hadn't been back much in years. And there it was looking at both the University of California from outside now, but also looking at the United States from a different place. We've been in California so long, going to the Midwest and kind of the eastern part of the Midwest was a different perspective on the United States. And that's been an incredible experience. Wonderful people there, an incredible university, really growing, really impactful, and that gave us a chance to be involved in all of those ways. And all of that together, I hope, forms a substrate for this next chapter. We're very excited.
So my background in politics makes one of the things that you did in Irvine really stand out. You're the only doctor I could think of that supported the creation of a law school. So that doesn't always happen, where you've got somebody from a medical background supporting the creation of new legal scholarship. Talk to us about that experience.
Well, very excited about that. That was when we first arrived. We were looking at the campus. I was looking at the campus and saying, gosh, what might be the next enhancement for this campus community? And there'd been a 40-year plan for a law school that never was quite right. My wife is a lawyer, as I mentioned. My older son is a lawyer, was in law school at the time. And so I'd had a chance to think about law schools and really sat with some people there, with Mike Gottfredson, who was the provost, and with others, and with members of the legal community, and said, what if we were to plan a new law school, kind of a 21st century law school, not to be a mirror image of or a reflection of past law schools, but really to be a law school for the future? And how would we create such a thing? What would it do? What would be the compelling reasons for it to exist? I had a chance to sort of rewrite some of the supporting materials. And then we put together a plan for what we thought would be a great 21st century law school, setting a real high standard. It was great fun challenge for us. And then was approved by the Regents nicely. And we then recruited the dean and the faculty, and it's been quite successful. It really was a thrilling experience. I'm really pleased about that. And let me just say, to answer your question specifically, the focus was a law school that would enhance the academic circumstances on the campus, really be a school that met the academic criteria and would be something that would work in the compelling interest of the campus and the campus scholarly community, but also a law school that would serve the broader community as well and would help to train people that would elevate and support the quality of legal services, et cetera, both in the government sector and private sector, et cetera, but support legal services in the community in and around Irvine and Orange County. And to have something that was at the scholarly level that would work to support and uplift the faculty, and at the public service level that would make the community better. That was the goal, and it's been working very nicely.
Well, look, congratulations, because my understanding is Irvine made its way into being a top 25 law school faster than any law school in the country, which is really a huge accomplishment. I want to come back to some of your experience as a physician and as somebody who's been involved in public health. But before I do that, just now that we're talking about other areas of education, what's always struck me is that although you're a well-respected physician and surgeon with numerous associations to national scientific and scholarly societies, and you've spent a great deal of time in the STEM fields, you've also displayed a very interesting passion for the humanities and broad-based education. Where does that come from, and what do you think the role of the humanities and social sciences are in the future of the University of California?
I think we have almost like a sacred trust to protect the humanities and social sciences. You know, the who we are is a really important part of our scholarly work, and so I've always been very interested in the humanities and the social sciences as the really the core of the study of and the understanding of who we are as people. My STEM background is that's been interesting, but I was always as a medical doctor. The medical medicine, the science were interesting, but it was in service of people, and it was important for me to know about the people as well. So they've always seemed to balance and complement each other, and I think it's extraordinarily important. We as a university, the university community broadly, protect the humanities and support the social sciences for sure. So it's been a passion and something I'm very involved in and enjoy it.
Well, let me follow up on that because you said, in serving people, right? Medicine in service of people. Part of your time at the University of California, you were dealing with binational health issues. You were dealing with public health issues. How does that, inform your worldview of healthcare? How does that inform your view of where we should be in this ongoing set of challenges with the current pandemic around COVID-19?
Well, you were a land grant university. We were brought into being to educate the sons and daughters of the people who were working to develop the country as it grew forward now 152 years ago for us. And in that focus, our role is to do things that uplift the quality of life and uplift the quality of life of the communities that we work in. And so it really is the people of these communities that we're here to serve. So we're here to educate their sons and daughters. That's great. We're here to do things, serve them and elevate the quality of their life. So the work that we've done in public health has been critical. The work that we do in nutrition, the work that we do in global health, all those things are important. The work that we do to uplift and support the economy, that's critically important. As a land grant institution, we're connected with agriculture. That's critically important. And you mentioned some of the work that we do with binational health, and the work there is we had agriculture and a lot of that work, and the people who were involved in the agriculture work, the public health of their circumstances was very important to us to make sure that all the people working in the state were healthy. When we look at the COVID-19 crisis, a true crisis, we see that there are particular segments of our population that are more vulnerable, and we as a society really need to make sure we focus on those people among us who are most vulnerable to whatever disease we're dealing with. And so all those things they all work together to try to make us, they help to guide our vision to be the best university we can be.
So I understand you've always had a picture of each of your parents in your office, and for the last several years you've had a different picture in your office that aligns with what we're just talking about. Talk to us about that picture.
Yeah, I have pictures. A lot of walls, so they're plaques and whatever else. But I have a few pictures up. First, right around me are Brenda and our boys and the grandchildren, so that they're closest. But I've had a picture. You mentioned I was co-chair of the California-Mexico Health Initiative starting nearly 20 years ago, and I had a dear colleague who's just retired, Xochitl Castaneda, and Xochitl would give me a present every year. And one year, she gave me a present, and it was a picture of a person working in a field, and you can't see him. His head's down, he's wearing a cap, and he can't see you as you're driving by. But he reminded me of a story I told years ago of who I thought we were working for. And I was asked when I first joined the office of the president, I had a coworker there, and he smoked a pipe. It was back in the day. He smoked a pipe, and he puffed his pipe and said, you finally have a boss. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you've been a professor all these years, and you all think you work for yourselves, and now you have a boss. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, now you work for the Regents, you have a boss. He puff. And I thought that my boss has always been the same person, and that's somebody I don't know who's working someplace. And if my work is done correctly, I'll help circumstances be such that his life and his family's lives will be elevated and can move forward. And I just had that image in mind of someone somewhere, not knowing who I was or what I was doing, but if our work were done appropriately, his life and his family's life would be better. And a few years later, Xochitl not knowing the story, she gave me this picture, and I said, "Oh, great, well, that's the guy. That's if we get it right, then his life is better, his children's lives are better, the lives of his community are better. So it's been up on my wall for probably 15 years, a little more than that, as just a quick reminder of who the boss is.
Well, yeah, I love that story, and I love the history of you working on this binational health project. I was down with Xochitl in Mexico City last November looking at some of these very questions, and she's going to be a loss in her retirement, but it does reinforce, what some of the challenges and what some of our goals ought to be. And when we look at the current numbers of COVID, Imperial County is skyrocketing in terms of numbers. Significantly, folks with low access to health care that are in jobs that require them to be out in public every day. Nationally, we know, for example, that only 1 in 5 African Americans have jobs where they could work from home, and only 1 in 6 Latinos have jobs where they can work from home. And these are communities that we're seeing spiking numbers and infections in COVID. What does that mean for our role in advocating not only for our research and our direct healthcare delivery, but in advocacy around a broader approach to disease management and public health?
I think broadly, we've, and throughout my career, your career, we've seen these really unacceptable disparities in healthcare and in health outcomes that plague our nation. And I think that we all need to be dedicated to finding them as we can, but eliminating those disparities. And many times they're as you just mentioned, they're connected to disparities in other types of opportunities. The job one has, the social determinants of health that describe one's life. And the work of the university broadly is meant to create opportunities to uplift the quality of life for our communities. And as those things work, I think the public health of the people that we serve improves as well.
Yeah. So as we engage in these conversations, obviously we're a public university. We have a public mission. And one of the sets of relationships that are important to us are our relationships with public leaders. So any thoughts on how you think we can continue to improve and build deeper, more meaningful relationships with the governor and the legislature and our congressional delegations and other key members of public policy areas?
Yeah, these last couple of days have been quite overwhelming and in a positive way for Brenda and for me. I received wonderful notes from people back from my grade school days up to the recent past. It's been quite humbling, and I really do appreciate the kind words that people have said. Many of them have come from elected officials that I've worked with over the years, and unusual maybe. I don't know if I'm weird, but I've enjoyed working with elected officials and working on policy. It's been something that has been one of the parts of my work these last 25 years or so that have been quite enjoyable. And so I believe that close relationships with people in elected office are extraordinarily important to us. And I also have this other view that might make me weird. I think that people go and get elected to positions overwhelmingly, routinely, because they want to do positive things, they want to do good. And maybe they come at it from different points of view or they have different perspectives, but we've worked really actively to try to find ways to pull people together and get them to support us. So I think that our relationships with our elected officials are critically important. We're, as you mentioned, a public university, but I think we're all in this for the same reasons, to try to raise the quality of life for those people who we live and work with and for. And I'm planning to continue to have great partnerships with people in elected office.
So I want to kind of pivot and go a little less in the university and a little more in terms of how you tech and more of the personal side. So quick softball to help us transition. Any interesting or unusual quarantine experiences, or any insight to how you find balance when you're in front of a Zoom screen 16, 17, 18 hours a day?
Well, you mentioned something that we noticed that it's going to be fascinating for us, and that is that when this all happened, we at my campus went to virtual education and began planning that on March the 9th. There were no cases in the state. We said, this is happening. We have to get out in front of this and move really quickly. And so we worked to do that. And from that moment, it was like we flipped the switch. And then it turned out for many of us, we were at work then all day, every day, 7 days a week for months on end. You'd wake up and you'd be at work. You'd finish your last call and go to sleep, and you'd be at work. And so we found that we were working more than we really ever had before on these things related to the COVID pandemic, things related to converting to more remote education, things related to managing the public health of the communities that we were responsible for with our healthcare system, and it was really all day. It was really all day, every day. What we found is that the faculty made an incredible pivot. I know that happened here as well. The faculty made an incredible pivot. Our students were flexible. We were able to complete coursework. It was different maybe in many cases, but we were able to do things in a satisfactory way that got us forward in this really difficult time. And one thing, maybe if I can say, Chairman Pérez, I've been teaching a course for years, every winter or spring. It was winter quarter or spring semester, depending on where I was. The dean of the law school and I taught the course together. So Erwin Chemerinsky and I originated the course together, like as the founding dean of the law school at Irvine. And we teach a course in civil rights, the Supreme Court, and the music of the civil rights era. It's a course meant to look at social movements in this country and around the world, and then how the laws respond to those or lead those. And then we use music because we wanted to have an art form that would help our students of today get a feeling of how people were in fact feeling back during the times these things were happening. And I believe that art reflects the personal and political and social circumstances of the artist. And so we use popular music as the reflection over time. A long soliloquy to explain the course. The course then, of course, went to become a Zoom course this last half of this last semester. And the students, as a part of their course, are required to do, it's a critical thinking course, but they do a project at the end. And they pick the project and whatever it's going to be. And one of the projects that a student did was she sort of did a photo collage and had that going along with some music that was being played. And this is someone who had been a freshman. This is a freshman seminar, so she's probably 19. And I looked at the photo collage, and it was just stunning how she moved through the era of the 50s and the 60s, capturing really important images to show a lot of that maturation of the public sentiment and culture. And looking at that, it occurred to me that she got the point of the course and really understood it and was able then to reflect it back, so that I was impressed. And I don't mean that, but that having lived through it and then taught it, I felt that I was seeing it again through fresh eyes. And so I mentioned that as an example of some things that we learned how to do better in this phase than we had done perhaps before, even though we were in a new mode of teaching. So those things were all a part of this really fascinating springtime.
Let me follow up on that. So, as I understand.
Tragic, but.
Yeah, so let me follow up, because as I've heard you talk about it too, there was both, this look at the courts and court rulings and what they meant as a broad national expression of where we were going. Yeah. There was the analysis of movement music, but also the analysis of popular music that wasn't tied to movements, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I remember as a student at Berkeley, bringing Hugh Masekela on campus to talk about, the great lyrics of Free Nelson Mandela, and going on and talking about Soweto. Really interesting movement music that was not necessarily always in alignment with popular cultural music that was the chart toppers.
Yes.
But maybe speak to this, because you were a student of the 60s. You experienced fundamental institutional change at universities as part of this movement. Now, 50-some years later, we have this spark of activism, this spark of national attention to many of the same issues. What do we learn from that experience?
Well, a couple of things. One, just going back to what you were saying, in the course, we use popular music, which includes music associated with the political movements, but also that does not. And part of the contrast there, we use we play the Beach Boys' "Surfing USA" and Chuck Berry's "Sweet Little 16" as a reflection of teenage life, and actually as a reflection of how cultures can be co-opted, in a different time, and so we wanted to talk about those things as well as politically focused music of the time, and I would say that a couple things there are a couple things I learned through the teaching of the course over these years. First with Irwin, and then with Alan Michaels, who was the dean of the College of Law at the Ohio State University. The material that we used for the course tended to be the same each year, as is the case with faculty, and we modified a bit, but often the same. But the context of the course changed because the circumstances in the world changed. So the students were coming of age at a different time. So the first students were a little bit after 9/11. And so that was kind of a pivotal moment for them, and something they used to kind of help set their worldview. We taught the course during the time of the Arab Spring, and all of the issues that were happening there, and that awakening, and then the awful circumstances that followed the civil war in Syria, and many things. So there were all things happening in the world that changed the context. And then Ferguson was part of the conversation. And Ferguson was interesting because we looked not only at what happened, but then at the reaction to the world and the reports that were done by the commission on what this should be. And we compared that to the McCone Commission following the Watch riots, then almost exactly 50 years before. And we found a disturbing parallel, that the words were almost interchangeable, the causes were almost exactly the same, the proposed solutions were quite similar, and we were repeating these things decades and generations later. And I think it at least left me with the compelling drive to try to figure what we can do differently this time, so that 25 and 50 years from now, no one else is repeating these things again.
But that speaks of the work that still needs to be done, and I think it's really important for us to look at that. But there were also fundamental structural changes that have been positive and that have moved us in meaningful ways, some of which we've walked away from, some of which we may be able to re-engage with. Any lessons learned from that you want to share with us?
Well, yeah, and one of the things I mentioned, you and I were talking a little bit ago, and my options to attend college were broadened in the period after the 60s. In the middle 60s, or with my older brother and sister, the places that they had to think of to attend college were much more limited than those that were available to me at the end of the 60s. And so my undergraduate degree and my opportunity to come to UCSF as a student would have been something that would have been entirely unusual 5 years before my time. And my career then in academic medicine maybe would have happened, but there was a pathway that really hadn't been available to people like me much before the era that I happened to come along. And so there were structural changes then that the leaders of the time said, we have to do something different in the future. So I think those things can happen and they can make a difference. They require our vigilant effort, and we have to get those things right as we move forward. But I do believe change is possible, change is good, we can make change, and I think there are opportunities coming up. The Regents have endorsed a change to broaden our ability to admit students to the university using criteria that help us to diversify and be diverse and inclusive, but I think that's very important.
Yeah, and so look, I think we still have huge challenges in terms of making sure that we broaden access to the university as much as possible. It's not just a question of race, it's a question of geography, it's a question of economics, it's a question of how we make ourselves a truly affordable and accessible university, and I know that you share that goal. And quite frankly, I know that you've had tremendous success in this area, in particular at the Ohio State University, where I think you doubled African American enrollment, you increased Latino enrollment by 50%, increased Asian American enrollment by 50%, shortened time to degree, so that you had a higher throughput and were able to get more people into the university. Have I got the numbers roughly right?
Yeah, the numbers are roughly right. Looking at the starting class when I began in 2014 to last year's beginning class, actually the numbers look even maybe a little better this year. You will have to see what happens with the final yield there, but we wanted to do what we could to diversify the class to be more inclusive, and had great support in moving in that direction. We also were looking for more economic diversity, so we increased the number of Pell students. That was something that we did with great intention. And nicely was able to work with colleagues from around the country in a couple of initiatives, the University Innovation Alliance, the American Talent Initiative, things where we brought other universities to partner with us to make these, to do more to create better opportunity for more talented students, regardless of zip code and income, et cetera. And we were able to bring actually hundreds of universities into a variety of coalitions to help move these things forward. And tremendously gratifying, and it's making a difference in the lives of thousands of students today.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to go back to the class. So the class is music of the civil rights era. You use music as a way to look at social movements, to look at broad political and legal change. But I've also heard that when you're not busy running a university, you sometimes find time to moonlight as a rock star. For those that don't know, you're proud owner of a Les Paul and a Gibson Stratocaster guitar, and you've played alongside other music enthusiasts at a variety of philanthropic events. How'd you get into that, and what's your favorite part of jamming on stage?
Well, let me say this for my colleague, the Fender Strat, but that's
Sorry.
It's okay. That only the only guitar nerds would worry about that, and just in case one's watching. Yeah, I played a little bit as a child. My first job was working as a clerk at Tower Records in Sacramento. I worked
the original Tower Records
right across the. Well, it was in a drugstore, pharmacy, and then moved to a paint store across the street near where my high school was. So I worked in that Tower Records, and I knew Russ Solomon, who's the. I knew Russ was the boss, and I was slightly under $2 an hour clerk, but I knew the boss enough, and so I enjoyed that, and then later on I began to I actually thought my kids had given the guitar away, and that I found it when we were cleaning up something. So and rusted strings, but I got the strings replaced, and then just started playing a little bit as a hobby, and then I thought, well, I could play well enough to not well enough to do anything with it, but well enough to play along with people who are nice to me. And I began to play in Southern California with John Tu, one of our supporters there, and his band. He had a band. His band was great. He had about 30 people in the band, so I was fine. I was completely fine. And then when I went to Ohio, to Columbus, I met a colleague there and who was on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame board, one of our foundation members. And I found a couple other board members who were in town and said, we ought to get together, find some musicians up to support us and play a little bit. So we started playing a few times a year, and we played, probably 20, 30 times over the years. I ended up joining the board of the Rock Hall. And so we would have these wonderful times to get to play together. And Jorma Kekkonen, who is the guitarist from the Jefferson Airplane, had moved to Ohio, and I got to meet him, and he showed me a few things here and there, and we played with him. So it was fun to go back and really find the old days and play some music with people.
I can't play an instrument, but I once sang at the Country Music Hall of Fame with John Rich. Everybody said it was a solo. I sang so low that nobody could hear me. It's the only way they'd let me. But you're on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This year's inductees include Nine Inch Nails, Whitney Houston, Notorious B.I.G. Any of them amongst your favorites?
Well, it's fascinating for me. The criterion for being admitted, you have to have a wonderful career, and you have to be 25 year career. And when the hall started, there were people who I listened to actively from my college and other days, and that was fine. As it rolls forward, we're getting into the kind of pivotal life music of people who were younger than I am. It's a new generation, so I've actually been reacquainted with music that was really coming out at the time that our children were young. So I was watching Mr. Rogers, more than listening to the radio and things. And so that's been great. Whitney Houston, of course, is an iconic president among women who've been recording artists. She is among the very top sellers of all time and 200 million albums. I mean, incredible success and broad appeal. And so that's great. And Nine Inch Nails, very focused music, and the sort of East Coast West Coast tension of that Notorious B.I.G. and Biggie and that group and his colleagues put forward, and then his relationship tragically, artistically, and then tragically with Tupac, who was inducted a couple of years ago. And listening to Biggie's music today, I mean, the messages are incredibly thoughtful for someone who was in his early 20s at the time he was describing life and moving forward. So I think that's great. Something else I'll say about the hall is that the concept of what's rock and roll, it started off being one sort of a thing. It's evolved a bit, and we're actually making sure that it's popular music of the day that is being what's supported and brought in. And so Tupac and Biggie and others, that's an important direction for the hall to be taken. So I'm pleased to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, Biggie's one of my favorites, and just renowned in terms of his talent and of course a career cut down way too early. But I understand you have some other favorite artists. I understand Otis Redding, Aretha, Sam Cooke. Are they?
Yeah, I mean, I like people who are wonderful, Okay. And I'll say this: I listened. My own listening style a lot was lots of jazz. So I listened particularly a lot to Miles Davis. I would say that was one of my just for knowledge. Back in the day, my two kind of go-to artists were Miles Davis and Marvin Gaye. Meaning, whenever they had an album out, I would buy it before I had listened to it. So right. Those were two automatic purchase threads for me. And I listened to a lot of jazz when I worked at Tower Records because my colleagues from high school played rock music all the time. You could play music. And one of the great privileges of working at the record store was that we were able to play the records to help market the sound. And we had a library of all of this music, really all the music across the world as a library. And back in those days, it's hard for people in this era to realize it sometimes, but you couldn't just hear a song. You had to go and buy it or wait for it to be on the radio and get lucky or request it. You couldn't just stream it. And so the record store was a way really now 40, 50 years ago to be able to do something that's more like streaming today, because I could be there saying, gee, I'd like to hear something that Miles did in 1958 and go and find it and play it. And I could say, gosh, he's playing with John Coltrane. I wonder what happened with Coltrane. And I could go to the Coltrane and then play Coltrane. Whereas that wasn't available in the general world. And people can do it now, but that was a lot of my musical interest came from being able to study, look at people, look at who were the people playing with them, and then follow those roots around, and that's been great. The quickie thing I'll say is that I've done the course on popular music between 1954 and 68. I've also, for fun, done a small version of that uses jazz music and really goes from Miles Davis up through John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Herbie Hancock, a lot of other people, Nina Simone, lots of others who were really focusing more on the African-American Black experience through the 50s and the 60s. And that's another fun thing for me to do.
Well, next year when they reopen, you're going to have to join me at the Hollywood Bowl for their jazz series, because just great jazz music we get in the summer. Let's go back to the new job. It's been 3 days since the Regents selected you as the next president of the university. What have you solved for us in the last 72 hours?
Yeah, I've said the bar has been set so high that I can easily get under it. I mean, I think that's we have these are unprecedented challenging times for us as a university, a state, as a nation, but also as a world. The pandemic is really horrific, and it's had led to countless personal family tragedies, and is still raging. And I'll just say that all I want everyone to wear masks routinely and to do what we can to damp this down until we're able to get better treatments and an effective vaccine, which will take time. But I have a mask inches away from me, and I think that it's critical for all of us to be, if we care about our fellow citizens, if we care about our economy, if we care about our families, if we care about our future, to do what we can to keep this tamped down. And you really have two sides in this. You can be on the side of humanity or on the side of the virus, and doing what you can to protect yourself is to put yourself on the side of humanity. And I think that's critically important. So that's a challenge for us there. The economy is a challenge for us, again, as a university, as a state, as a nation, as a world. We have to flow with those, do our best to, in this tight economic time. And then it's a time where social justice, the inequities of social circumstances and the social determinants of health are clear on an everyday basis. And these are all the kinds of things that this university has been involved in since its founding. And they are challenges that we have to face as we're moving forward. Luckily, we have an incredible faculty. The faculty are among the most creative, thoughtful people in the world, and are working as we speak on the issues that I've listed. We have a wonderful group of chancellors, wonderful group of colleagues at OP, and working there in Oakland. Great support and input from the regents and others in the broader community. Committed legislators, many of whom I had a chance to speak to earlier this week. And our collective efforts are going to be the pathway to the future, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone.
So, as I said, when we began the process of doing the search, in addition to the traditional consultation, we went out to campus and did listening tours and had fora. There are a couple of issues that came up time and time again, and I don't expect us to have an exhaustive conversation about them here, but just remind everybody that we heard them, and that I know that as you're taking on the role of president, you'll be addressing them both in your work and in your communications as you get around to campuses. But let me just run through some of the thematics we heard time and time again. Campus funding and equity between campuses, so a campus like Merced can continue to grow and thrive and become the campus that it strives to be. Labor relations and how we improve the relationship as the university is one of the largest employers in the state. Issues of equity and inclusion. And obviously those are particularly interesting this week as we're dealing with the challenges of ICE trying to create impediments for our international students. But the thematic that came up the most, every campus, more comments than anything else, is the university's role in global climate change. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about your view of what the university's role needs to be in global climate change. And just for those watching, the University of California uses more green power than any other university in the nation. We're also the leader in the amount of renewable electricity we generate on campus. Recently, the portfolios of our chief investment officer of the Regents became 100% fossil free. But what role can we do to step up as global conveners, for example, in these questions of global climate change?
Well, again, critically important questions. And, I was mentioning different groups of people that we have that we are working with and that we'll work with to create the future. And I didn't mention students and staff in that list. And I don't want anyone to think that, if I'm giving 3 or 4 examples, it diminishes the examples that I don't use just for time. But students and student input are incredible. And I had a chance to talk with student leaders, and I've enjoyed, as I've mentioned, teaching all of these years and working with students actively. That's incredibly important. And then our staff really are the backbone of the university in so many ways. They're with us for decades and make all of these things possible. So I don't ever want to not, they're always in the forefront of our minds. Climate change is critically important. It was one of the 3 most important things we focused on at UC Irvine during my time there. We focused on the environment as being extraordinarily important. We focused on social progress through being a global community. We focused on healthcare. Those were kind of the hallmarks of our fundraising campaign, and we were very pleased at that campus to both build the campus and to program the campus to focus itself on environmentally sustainable ways of being in the world. And so we have now multiple times been listed as the coolest campus in the country by the Sierra Club, and no campus had done this in a repeated fashion before UC Irvine. So that was achieved right at the time I was leaving and has been sustained by my successor and my colleagues, and really taken it to an even higher level. So we see that we can be responsible environmentally, and that's great. As a globe, as a nation, it's really critically important that we work to reverse the climate change that we've seen changing the ecosystem right before our eyes. And the university is meant to be a leader, and I think that's appropriate. At the Ohio State University, I was actually working with the president of the University of California today, Janet Napolitano, my colleague and friend, and we were part of the University Climate Change Collaborative, the UC3, and proud to be a part of that and want to continue working on those efforts. Now I'll do that from the University of California side, but having partners across the country to help show the best way forward to have us be effective stewards of our environment. That's critically important to us.
You and I talked before about some of the work that was undertaken at Ohio. You talked about soil
Yes.
And carbon capture. And California is a huge agricultural state. It's one of the most important industries, and the relationship between the university and the realities in the agricultural field are incredibly important. Talk to us about soil, if you would.
Yes, one of the things I was able to do nicely while I was in Ohio, particularly, is spend time on farms and with farmers. And we have Professor Lal, Ratan Lal, is a professor who this year won the World Food Prize for his work. So he was a great friend and colleague, and he and others here and around the world are great proponents of sustainable farming, of carbon capture by using non-till farming to be able to pull carbon into the plants and then to replace that carbon back into the soil in ways that can be done on the hundreds of millions of farms around the world, whether it's large farms or farms run by a single person in remote parts of the world that are remote from where we are now. So there are multiple things that we can do like that to help reverse the trends that have led to the issues that we're dealing with so much today. And I became a very big supporter and fan of carbon recapture through sustainable farming, and hope that we can continue to find opportunities. One of the great things I'll say is, again, these are technically there are many challenges to get these processes to work as we move forward. But one of the things that we were able to find was ways that you could increase yield while farming sustainably. And so you could really work for the success of the farm economically and the success of the environment. And I know it doesn't apply to every farm in every circumstances, but we were very interested in finding ways this could be in the practical interest of the farmer as well as in the broader interest of the world.
So let me ask an unfair, because we're short on time now, I'm going to ask a don't you agree question. Given the incredible research and innovation happening on each of our 10 campuses with respect to issues of innovation and global climate change, don't you think that we should be one of the key global conveners on these questions?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Because we're short on time, I just want to touch on one other issue where you've been an incredible leader. You're just wrapping up your term as chair of the NCAA Board of Governors. One of the many interesting issues that I've seen discussed in that role was safety of student athletes and how we return. But the other is a different kind of question, which is the role of the Confederate flag and what leverage points we as universities and college sports have in some of these broader questions. Anything you want to share with us there?
big series of questions, and big challenges facing us all in planning and looking at what return will be like. What does that mean? How will it be done? How much will it be? So that is both an academic issue and a student life on campus issue, also an athletic issue. And I'd say that my colleagues, we all are thinking about that all day, every day these days, and those answers are not entirely clear even at this date. One of the things I will say, the NC2A has been focused on many issues this last year, and I think are really working hard to make real improvements in modernizing the association to be able to support today's students, athletes, even better than they were supported in the past. So that's ongoing work. One thing we were able to do was to look at the flag policy, and the NC2A just a few weeks ago, we voted to have a policy saying that we would not allow championships to be held or playoffs to be held in places that displayed the Confederate flag. We had limited the Confederate flag, our scheduling of championships in places that displayed the Confederate flag years ago. There were some opportunities that people could earn their way into hosting a championship in places where the flag was still displayed. And we believe that the flag has so many negative connotations. It means so much to so many people in such a negative way that this was not appropriate for our student athletes and others to have to confront. And so we made a change in policy just three and a half weeks ago, and are pleased now that with the change that we've seen in Mississippi, none of the states will display the Confederate flag and as a part of their flag. And I think it's high time.
Dr. Drake, I want to thank you. We're coming close to the end of our hour, and I want to be respectful of your time and the time of folks that are watching. I will tell you that my phone has been blowing up with people wanting to get you in front of a variety of forums to hear you talk. There's so many more issues that I wanted to cover with you. I got to take advantage of the privilege of the chair to have the first conversation with you of this kind. I want to invite you to have more of these with other parts of the UC community, as I know you will, so that we can get to a lot of the other questions that we weren't able to get to today. But I just wanted to give you a chance to make the case for what you would say to somebody who's thinking about whether or not now is the right time to come to the University of California to study, to teach, or to work, because I think you have a compelling point of view.
I do. I mean, I'll be the example in this case. At this point in my career and in this point in life, and talking with Brenda, as I mentioned, this opportunity came before us, and I will say that there's no other opportunity that I would have considered at all. This is the most impactful public research university in the world. It's the model for public research university systems in the world. We've had an incredible impact on California, the United States, and the world, and we are in a position to continue to do that as we move forward. It's a wonderful institution. It changed my life. It changed the life of millions of our alumni, and it's changed the quality of life of our state, our nation, and our world. And it's a privilege to be a part of the University of California.
Thank you. I mean, I always say that we're at a university that really innovated free speech and shared governance, and they are two of the backbone values of this great public university. I will just say on behalf of myself and my colleagues on the Board of Regents, and I know so many others throughout the UC system, that we are so excited that you chose to come home and to lead the University of California in this next phase of our growth and our development. And I'm just excited about the opportunity to work with you, and thank you for spending this time with us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.